Hey VC, Dave here. Hadn't made a video in a while, and I thought I'd get back on here and show what I've been listening to lately, and I found a few new finds as well. So let's get into it. Went to a Goodwill store and found this. It's a 3 CD box set of Mozart concertos, and it has all these different instruments that solo in the orchestration, and it's by the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, and it's got some solos by bassoon, flute, clarinet, and oboe, as well as flute and harp concerto on one piece. And I don't know a lot about classical music. I just know what I like, and if you're looking to get into classical, you can't hardly go wrong with this conductor here. I've got several things that he's the conductor on. I don't know if it's pronounced Caharan or how he says it, but it's with the Berlin Philharmonic, and it's real easy to get into music. It's real pleasant, so you know, it's real easy to put on in the mornings and, you know, listen to while you drink your coffee, tea, or what have you. And I would have liked, it's on the Angel label. I wish it would have had more soloing on it, but for the price that I bought it at, like I said, it's a 3 CD set. For the price I bought it at, it was a really good buy. And like a lot of classical music, you know, it's hardly played at all. So yeah, I was happy to find that. And then I went over to another charity shop, and I found, I think these came out of a box set from what I could look at online about them, and they are various Blue Note collections. They all come in this sort of identical sleeve, and they kind of do it in chronological order, like this one here. I believe it's the first one, yeah. It starts out Boogie to Bebop, and some of these artists I have already, but a lot of them I didn't have, so I was happy to you know, get it for that reason, and for the price it was a really good deal. But like I said, this one starts out excuse me, with Boogie to Bebop, with stuff like I think Sidney Bechet's on here, Tad Dameron with Fats Navarro is on here, Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Milt Jackson, Bud Powell, and just a lot of Sonny Rollins is on here as well, and Jimmy Smith, the organist, is on here. And then it goes on from there to the Jazz Message, which is this one, and it's got like John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Dexter Gordon, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Bobby Hutcherson, Larry Young, just a bunch of, you know, sort of post-jazz, I guess you might say, jazz musicians and on there. And from there it kind of goes into Lighting the Fuse, and it's more kind of contemporary jazz, maybe a little bit easy listening. There's some Stanley Turrentine on here. Bobby McFerrin has a cut on here. Diana Reeves, Ronnie Laws, Donald Byrd, Earl Klug, and Grant Green, among some others, are on here as well. Like I said, I have, you know, some albums by a lot of these jazz guys, but there's a lot of them I didn't have. And there's not a jazz station here where I live in East Texas. You can, there's some in Dallas for sure, but here in East Texas the radio stations are not very good at all. And when I'm out driving around, I can, you know, pick them up, although it kind of fades a little bit. Of course, I can always get stuff over the computer or television. But anyway, it was a nice buy. This is Outside In, which is sort of starts getting into your free jazz territory. It's got Eric Dolphy on here, his Out to Lunch, which I do have that album. Andrew Hill, Ornette Coleman, McCoy Tyner, Tony Williams, and Joe Henderson is on here, along with several others. And it doesn't get really wild with the free jazz, but it just is the sort of, I guess you might say, beginning of that stuff. So yeah, it was a really good find for that. And then I found at the same charity shop, I found this soundtrack here. And I'm not really familiar with the anime that this comes from. Tenchi the movie. I don't know anything about that anime at all, but the reason I picked it up was because the soundtrack was done by Christopher Franke, which used to play in Tangerine Dream, synthesizer player. And I've been watching Babylon 5 here lately on TV, which he has done the soundtrack for that, which I have back in the back there. And I was real curious, I mean, the price was cheap on this, so I was just curious to know what it sounds like. And I was kind of expecting it to be more synthesizer oriented, and it's not. It does sound more soundtrack like. And if you can, you know, just take it on its own merit, you know, it is a pretty interesting album. You know, and there's a little bit of synthesizer on here too, but it's more almost like it's orchestrated or something. And you know, I've only heard this once, so it's kind of really hard to get a feel for it. But and I think there's one or two even vocals maybe towards the end of this thing on it. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting music if you like orchestrated type soundtrack stuff. So sort of interesting to hear. I picked up this one. This is Jimmy Bruno Burnin, and I was not really familiar with this guitarist. He kind of plays in a he's definitely a jazz guitarist, sort of maybe sort of easy listening, sort of along the lines of somebody like you know, Wes Montgomery or maybe Joe Pass, something like that. It's on the Concord Jazz label, and it's just trio jazz. Jimmy Bruno plays guitar on it, Craig Thomas plays bass, and Steve Holloway plays the drums. And it's just real easy, I'd say easy listening jazz. But one of the things that struck me when I first heard this on this first cut is called Eternal Triangle, which is a song written by Sonny Stitt. There are various jazz artists that he is covering on this thing, like Moonlight in Vermont, that's kind of a classic, and Giant Steps with John Coltrane, and golly, a bunch of other ones. I think he's only he penned one song on here, I think, and the rest are covers or music by other artists. But what I was going to say is that like the first song struck me, the way that it sounds. I mean, like he plays really fast, like almost like John McLaughlin or something on that first song. Although it's not fusion, he just can play the guitar really fast, and you know, really clean in the way that he plays as well. And it's just nice guitar focused trio jazz. So if if that kind of sounds like it might appeal to you, it's definitely one to look into. Of course, a lot of these things you can look up on eBay or Signify if any of it appeals to you. But it's pretty pleasant jazz. I like listening to jazz guitar anyway, so it's kind of right down my alley. I also found these two. This is Larry Coryell's Basics, and I really picked it up for the cover, but I also do like some of Larry Coryell's music. I like the back too, with the mandala on the back. But and Larry Coryell, he's been around for forever. I mean, he passed away a couple of years back, but I think he's basically known as a fusion guitarist. And this is fusion music, and it has Ron Carter on it, plays the electric bass. Mike Mandel plays organ. Chuck Rainey plays electric bass on it. And of course also he has two drummers that play on different tunes, and a percussionist, Ray Mantilla, plays percussion on it. But and this is fusion jazz, which I would say is my least favorite stuff that Coryell does. But and it's a real short album. It's just 35 minutes. But for the experience of getting to hear it, which I've only heard it once, and I wasn't, when I first heard it, I wasn't really awestruck by it or anything. But I heard it a second time, and it's starting to grow on me, so it might be one of those grower type albums. But I'm not really keen on fusion to begin with. It's just not something I go to automatically, out of my collection. But it might grow on me over time. And the same is for this other one that I found there, which is this one. And maybe this one is more better known. I don't know. This is the Essential Larry Coryell on Vanguard Records, and this has several well-known jazz musicians in it, like Larry Brecker plays the horns on it. Billy Cobham and Elvin Jones plays drums. You have Mike Mandel on it again, along with John McLaughlin, Glenn Moore, Ralph Towner, Chuck Rainey, and Colin Wilcox plays on it. And again, it's more fusiony, and I've only heard this once, and I need to listen to it, several more times to get a handle on it. But I was happy to find it for the price, for sure. Like I said, I generally prefer Coryell in its acoustic settings, and like this is one I've had, which is his, and I think this is probably maybe one of his better known albums, which is called Spaces. If I can get it out of here, I'll just show it like this. This is one of his earlier fusion albums. In fact, I've often wondered where the genre of fusion came from. And this has got like Larry Coryell on guitar, along with John McLaughlin. Chick Corea plays electric piano. Miroslav Vitus plays bass, who also played in Weather Report, I'm pretty sure. And Billy Cobham plays as a drummer on this. And from what I've read, this album actually came out before Bitches Brew by Miles Davis. And I always thought that Bitches Brew might have been the one of the earlier, if not maybe the first fusion album. But evidently this album came out before that did, and then all these players, with the exception of Coryell, went over to play on Bitches Brew as well. So this is one of the albums that came out before Bitches Brew. And I don't know if it's the first fusion album, but anyway, sort of an interesting part that it has in the history of it, with him playing with McLaughlin and Cobham and all these other guys, Chick Corea, before the Bitches Brew album. And then there's also a lot of blackbirds out of my yard today. Is this album here. I re-listened to this recently. This is a young Django, referring to Django Reinhardt, which is the guy in the picture right here. He is the French guitarist. They have quite a few albums by him as well. He just plays guitar, jazz guitar, very early jazz guitar, and is really good at it. And of course here is Stephen Graffelli. This is a Stephen Graffelli album. And you've got Larry Coryell here. And this guy here is really young. Niles, I always have to look at his name to pronounce it, Ofsted Peterson. And also known as N-Hop, plays the bass. And then the other guy, I think, is Philip Catherine, which also plays a guitar as well. But anyway, it's a Stephen Graffelli album, and these other guys, you know, play on it. And it's all Django Reinhardt songs, where some of them were co-written by Stephen Graffelli. There's one song on here by Philip Catherine, and the last song, Blues for Django and Stephen, is by Larry Coryell. But this is pretty much, it's kind of more of an acoustical album, but if you're familiar with Stephen Graffelli at all, it fits right in with his swing stuff. And if you like swing music, swing jazz, it's a really beautiful album to get, for sure. This is on the PA USA label right there. And it's a real pleasant album. I love swing jazz. It puts me in the right mood. It makes me, you know, happy in a way, or brightens my mood. So this is a good one to pick up if that sounds like it might appeal to you. Here's another one by Larry Coryell. This is European Impressions, and this is an all acoustic album, solo acoustic album by Larry Coryell, and this was recorded live at the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1978, and it has I believe 6 cuts are on it, or 7. And they're all just, you know, Larry Coryell on soloing on acoustic guitar, and it's all done really well. And there's no crowd noise or anything. I don't know how they recorded it, but they didn't have any crowd noise or anything like that. Just all acoustic album, done really well. So if that sounds like it might appeal to you, it's a really lovely album. Here's another one too that I like by Coryell, Just Like Being Born. This is Larry Coryell playing duos with Brian Keane over there. And Brian Keane is probably not well known in the music community at all, but golly, man, he's done a bunch of stuff, and he's a really excellent guitarist. I think I read online where he's you know, recorded, like, I thought it said 1,000 albums. That seems incredibly, like an incredible amount of albums. But I believe that's what it said. He's also done like soundtracks from documentaries, and produced a lot of different albums, for Windham Hill. I'm sure I've got some albums that he has helped produce. And like I said, this is just him and Larry Coryell playing duos, and it's on the Flying Fish record label here. So if you're familiar with some of the better acoustic albums on Flying Fish, I definitely recommend this one here. It's a really pleasant album to listen to in the mornings, or whenever, even late in the evenings. And it came out, I think, in the 70s, something like that. 84, actually. That's what it's got on there. Really nice album. And then I heard I was real curious. I hadn't heard this album in a long time. This is Sheila Chandra's Quiet album. This is one of her early albums where she, as you can see, there's 10 cuts all on it, and they're all called Quiet, and that's a good name for the album, because it's all real quiet type stuff. Not quite ambient, but almost in that mode. And it came with this, and it has Indian musicians on here as well. You've got, she does the vocals on here. I don't know if you can see that, but she does the vocals on here, and then she also plays some various instruments like spoken bowls. I don't know if that's referring to her vocals on here. Sorghum bells and water walk. There's also some sitars, tambura. There's some gamelan type stuff on here. Some gongs and cymbals and bass guitar, synthesizer, piano. But and the way that she sings isn't, it's not in American or in Indian actually. She kind of sings in like vowels and stuff. There's a little broadside type flyer in it right here that kind of describes the album. And what she says is that she sings in melodies. There aren't any lyrics, so to speak of. They're just like vocal symbols or vocal rhythmic syllables that she sings in, and she kind of describes it on here. But like I said, it kind of comes off as being a real almost ambient experience, or a ambient sounding album. And it's real pleasant. Like I said, you could listen to this album too anytime. I do like the record label on it as well. Let's see. It's on the Indie Pop label. And the instruments aren't really pronounced in it, and neither is her singing on here. It's just all kind of very kind of hypnotic and almost kind of nebulous. I always feel like it's real hard to wrap your head around the music, and it's real hard, just as hard to describe, but it's an interesting album if you've never heard it. And then there's another one here that I got by her as well. Now this one here I would recommend really over that other one. This one is called Monsoon, Third Eye, and this one is more indie pop. And in fact, again, she has some Indian musicians on here that play various things like piano, tablas, bass guitar, sitar. You know, there's some backing vocals, and a little bit of everything on this one. And it's definitely more pop than that other one, which I kind of consider more ambient. This one here, she does her version of the Beatles song Tomorrow Never Knows. And it's definitely the way she kind of does this album. There's a lot of textures with what seems like, I think, are synthesizers, if not some other instrument. But her vocals on here are done in English, and in some ways it kind of reminds me of this album here, if you've ever heard it. This is Laurie Anderson's Mr. Heartbreaker album. And this album, along with maybe something that Peter Gabriel might have done, it's sort of like that, but you know, done with the Indian influence, heavy Indian influence on it. So yeah, it's a good album. I actually would think this album would be a better starting point than the other one, just because it's a little bit more Americanized or has broader appeal to it. But they're both pretty interesting albums if you ever run across them in the wild, whatever. And then Cosmic Pickle was talking about this album here, Soul on the Machine, which I've had for a long time, and was talking about on Windham Hill label, and was talking about some of these artists on the back of it, which is their electronic album. Mostly they do acoustic music and what have you, but on this one it's all electronic, and it's kind of ambient, you know, kind of soft in the textures and everything on it. But I was out and I found this one here too. This is Sanctuary, which is 20 years on the Windham Hill label. Now I have a lot of artists, or a lot of albums by the artist on the Windham Hill label, and this is a 2 CD set. One of the CDs is more acoustic, and the other one is more electric, and not quite electronic like this one, but very close to it in comparison. And like on the acoustic side, you know, you have people like William Ackerman, which I believe is the guy who founded the Windham Hill label. But you also have like Michael Hedges, which is a really great acoustic guitarist. You have Liz Story, which is a pianist. Alex DeGrassi is on here, and like Modern Mandolin Quartet, which is a really good quartet that plays their own versions of classical music. And then on the on the electric side of things, you have people like Scott Cousseau, Andy Norrell, Andy Norrell, who plays marimba, xylophone, that type thing. You have Shadowfax, which is a band that kind of plays acoustic electric type light jazz. Mark Isham has a excerpt from one of his soundtracks from Mrs. Soulful, I believe is what it is. Yeah, that's right. Which was an excerpt that he did for one of his soundtrack albums. Mike Marshall and Daryl Anger and various other artists. I don't think you can see these, but they are varied. And then, like on the very last track, there's the Tuck and Patty song on that very last side. And I wasn't real familiar with Tuck and Patty. I've heard the name a lot, but I think Tuck does most of the instruments and Patty sings. It's called Tears of Joy, and it says that it tracks out at 3 minutes and 52 seconds. But I guess they got like a, oh, I forget what they call it, a bonus on the end of it, because the song totally changes. Kind of starts out as maybe a gospel acoustic song, and then it kind of stops, and then there's another, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes of something that sounds like a synthesizer song at the end of it. So it's kind of curious if that was actually Tuck and Patty, or if that was just like something that they threw on the end of this. But at any rate, I was really happy to get this, particularly for the price, to get all these guys and listen to them in you know, random order from the way that I may have them on album. And there's a lot of people on here too that I wasn't familiar with. So yeah, if you can see this and find it at a good price, it's a neat album. Well, anyway, that's a few of the things that I found here recently. And been reading this book here lately, which I found at the library for $1. This is the biography of Steve Jobs, and there he is with one of the early Apple computers. Been a real interesting read. This guy here, this Walter Isaacson, has written a book on Benjamin Franklin as well as Albert Einstein, and his writing style is really easy to read and everything. And I've been enjoying it a lot. I know some people, consider Jobs to be real difficult or, kind of a jerk, really. But and I'm sure he was in certain instances. You can't really get to where he got to in life without being a little bit of a jerk sometime in your life. But he was just a real driven person, and he really did a lot as far as the setting us into the where we are now with computers, YouTube, technology, and all that type of thing, making the MP3 players, iPads. Been a real interesting read, along with him and Steve Wozniak and all the other people that he came in contact with in Silicon Valley, and just talks about him growing up and all that stuff too. It's a little bit about his parents and various things like that. So it's been a real interesting read. So at any rate, that's what I have. Kind of an overcast day today, but I've been enjoying it so far, and I hope you all find something interesting to read or listen to. And this is Dave in Texas. I'll talk to you later.